This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast. I'm Mary Ann Matzo.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete.
Thank God. Please grab something strong to drink or whatever you're thirsty for. Maybe a piece of cake. That would be good. And thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me. In the first half, we have our recipe of the week, including nutritional advice from Charlie.
Right.
In the second half, I'm going to talk about the stages of grief. Am I talking too slow for you? And in the third half, we're going to have an interview with Dr. Ken Doka, who talks with us about the stages of grief. So, for our loyal listeners, usually I'm talking about my family food recipes, and I was about to put in a recipe from my grandmother when I thought, Charlie never talks to me about the recipes that he grew up with. So I sent him a text. I said, Charlie.
I've never asked, but that's okay. But I'm ready. I'm recipe ready.
Oh, I figured you were a big boy.
That's right. Big boy now.
I figured you were a big boy, you would tell me. So I said, Charlie, send me, do you have a family recipe, that you used to, have fond memories for? Send that to me. So he sends me a recipe for mixed nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at this recipe and I say to myself, what, did his family sit around drinking beer, eating bar nuts? What the heck is going on here? Because I've met his family. I don't remember any bar nuts or drinking. So I said, Charlie, you sent me a recipe for your salty nuts. And he said, yes, I did.
So my salty nuts, yes.
So Charlie,
Yes.
What the heck?
Well, if I recall correctly, and probably not, we discussed about happy food. Basically, food that makes us happy and stuff like that. And for me, happy food, or as I like to call it, you want pizza or a po' boy tonight, is, yes, food that makes you happy. And by happy, technically speaking, it's food that is good for you. Not only your stomach in a healthy way, but your brain as well. You're probably not going to like where this is going, so let's lay our cards on the table. Full disclosure, happy food is actually healthy food. So when you're ready to tear into that pack of gummy bears and suddenly remember, hey, what did Charlie say about eating processed foods with ingredients I can't pronounce or words I can pronounce but have no idea what they mean, like artificial flavor, added sugars, and partially produced with genetic engineering? Highlight it so you can see it as you gobble down. And speaking of gummy bears, our first recipe is gummy bears and vodka. Ingredients are gummy bears and vodka. On a plate.
Are these
Yes.
gummy bears with like edible marijuana gummy bears?
Oh no, that's an entirely different recipe, Marianne. Yeah. That's a different. We'll have that at a future show, or if I can rustle up that recipe, we'll include it in our recipe column. No, today we're sticking with the original gummy bears and vodka, and ingredients: gummy bears and vodka. So on a plate, any type of flat plate will do. Cover the plate with gummy bears. Add vodka. So for this and other recipes, go to our website, everyonedies.org. That's dies.org. You will also find a link to additional resources for this program. We appreciate your questions and anything else you want to tell us. You can mail us at mail@everyonedies.org. Please join our Facebook group, Everyone Dies. This time you have to spell it out, everyone. And please remember to rate and review this podcast.
That's it? Do you pour the vodka over the gummy bears? Do you eat a gummy bear? And I'm confused.
You know what? I should have detailed the instructions. Good point. Well, look, it is necessary to not pile up the bears. It's a bear necessity. Old Mother Nature's recipe. But, and this is the secret, they have to be flat. Don't pile them up. This allows for an even distribution of vodka, which the gummy bears soak up. The way a sailor needs to be soaked up after 6 months at sea, if you catch my drift. Allow about 90 seconds to marinate. The gummy bears, not the sailor. Sailor probably wouldn't need 90 seconds. If you don't have a timer, use this time to practice your counting skills. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, all the way up to 91,000. Soaking time may vary depending on where you live in the country and at what elevation. In a higher elevation like Denver or whatever my local pot dispensary is selling this week, you may want to add a few 1,000s. And for those of you anxious to review your high school Spanish, un mil, dos un mil, tres un mil, all the way up to 91 mil. And a special shout out to my first Spanish teacher, Mrs. Salinas, who's probably rolling over in her grave.
Charlie?
Yes, I know what you're going to ask. This recipe has been tested in the test kitchens of Everyone Dies, as well as my apartment. We will post instructions as well. Marianne?
So these are infused gummies with vodka, or gummies infused with vodka?
Well, no, infuse, jeepers, let's see here. I would imagine you infuse a turkey with stuffing. With these bad boys, you lay them flat on the plate. Okay, there you, and I should mention, usually it's best to put the vodka on the plate first, put the gummy bears on top, and let the gummy bears soak up the vodka. But let me ask you, you see, that's soaking up. So I'm not putting anything into them. The gummy bears are putting things into themselves in a weird scientific reanimator.
Which by definition is infusion. Right?
I guess in a passive sense, yes, because they're not doing it to. Yes, so they'd be. You know what? So they soak up. They soak up the vodka and become infused with vodka.
So at the top of the program, you mentioned happy food is actually healthy food. So it's good for both your stomach and your brain.
Huh? Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
How is this recipe a healthy food?
I might have digressed. So please go to everyonedies.org, again, dies.org, for a link to this recipe and additional resources for this program. You can email us all your secrets at mail@everyonedies.org. That's mail@everyonedies.org. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. It would be so helpful if you would also remember to rate and review this podcast. And listen,
well, Sandy's
make
also
sure
going to post the.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sandy's going to post not only that recipe, but also Charlie's salty nuts. No pictures, however. So ingredients are 8 tablespoons of butter, at the bottom, 8 cups raw nuts. Sometimes pecan, sometimes cashew, sometimes almonds. And I'm going to go rogue and say that garlic powder, which is one of the ingredients I didn't mention, garlic powder is optional. Basically, you mix all the ingredients, spread them in a single layer in a pan, bake 325, 23 to 26 minutes, stir every 5 to 10 minutes, and there you are. And this is why I'm never allowed to give out a recipe. Marianne?
Okay. Well, thank you, Charles. So in our second half, I'm going to be talking with you about grief and loss. And I know that we've talked about a variety of different areas of grief and loss. And so today, we're going to kind of go in a different direction. So by general definition, loss is the absence of something valued. So loss is the absence of something valued. It could be actual in terms of other people say, yes, you've had that loss. Or it could be perceived. I think that I've lost my relationship with, John F. Kennedy Jr. And That's not actual. It's not verified. It's never happened. But to me, I feel like I've lost it. So you can have actual losses and perceived losses. But both types of losses are perceived by the individual to be real losses. Now, grief is the emotional feeling as it relates to loss. Grief and loss can be experienced in a wide range of experiences, like the death of a family member or pet, or having an illness, or even by events that can bring us joy. We can retire, but still have some grief. We can graduate and still have some grief because we've lost something. We've lost what we've known, and now we have to figure out the next part.
Yeah, the unknown. Yeah.
So, right. So I've had many people ask about the normal stages of grieving, and they want to know, how long am I supposed to be in each stage? Am I progressing the way I'm supposed to? How long does each stage going to last? Because they've heard of these 5 stages by Kubler-Ross, and they say to themselves, well, all right, here I am. I'm at this anger stage, and so how long am I going to be here? And when can I move to the next stage? So I really thought we needed to talk about that. So Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she published her first book in 1969. And that book was about terminal illness and the dying process. And her research was done with people who had late-stage terminal illness and were dying. And she hypothesized, meaning she thought that maybe there were these sequential stages, meaning one right after the other. You did one, and then you did the next one, and then the next one. She thought, well, maybe there's these stages that you go through. And so the 5 stages as they become known as the 5 stages of grief, which was not what she was even talking about, but the 5 stages were never meant for application to people who were grieving. It's not even really clear how it happened to become so ingrained in society. You can hear about it in movies and in comedy routines, and it's just all throughout our society. There's these 5 stages, you're going to go through them, and here's how it goes. This is how we grieve. It's not true. It wasn't meant to be that way. It wasn't meant to be explained that way. And in fact, researchers have tried to study, what Kubler-Ross was saying, and to confirm, in fact, that this was the way that people grieved. And so studies have been performed where they have not been able to confirm that there are separate stages of adaptation and grief. It's not been confirmed by the research process that we use. And so there's this thing that people have held on to. It's sort of like, vaccinations cause autism, even though it's been disproved scientifically, and even though the person who did the research initially has said, I lied and I was fraudulent and that's not what the outcomes were, we still hold on to it. And
Right.
I'm not going to go into vaccinations. Please don't even say a word about it, Charlie. It's just an example.
Just one?
So given that there's no research to support the models and stages of grief, why is this theory so culturally prevalent? Well, it could be because when we're grieving, we feel so powerless. And when we've lost something, we feel so powerless. And which is especially true when you're grieving a death, that we want to think that there's this structure to the whole experience. We want to think, well, all right, I really don't know what I'm going to do right now. I'm just out of my mind with grief and loss. And so if I think that, okay, I have to start with this first stage and this is what I'm supposed to do, well, then that gives some structure to this incredibly unstructured experience. So we don't know what to do. Our brains kind of hold on to the idea that if we just start with the first stage, that by the time we get to the 5th stage, will be better. Life that feels out of control following the loss. And this Kubler-Ross model gives us a map through our pain. And gosh, it would be great if that were true. It would be great if we had a map to get us from point A to point B when we've had a loss. But we don't have a map.
Yeah, exactly.
Kubler-Ross's 5 stages do not apply. Go ahead. What?
Yeah. What am I trying to say? Yeah, everyone, reacts to death and the grieving process differently. It's emotion. One size does not fit all, and people deal with it in a different way. I had a client last week, and her husband had died, I don't know, about 2 years ago, and she was able to find comfort in not getting rid of their bed because her sons kept, and apparently they still do, say, God, that's really creepy, Mom. That's sick. You need to get rid of that bed. Dad's gone. You're laying in a dead. She said something like a dead man's bed or something like that. But for her, it's not creepy. She feels comfortable. It's a bed they'd shared. I think she said like for 28 years. It's not. If anything, I look at it like as a guide, as a suggestion. It's not a predetermined path you have to follow. You may skip 2 or 3 stages,
but it's
not at all.
It's not even a guide. It's not even a suggestion. It's not even developed for grieving. It was developed for dying.
I understand that, but human nature, people, will take something and make it into something unexpected. There's this, what are those things called? You put your
right, and I'm saying we need to stop it. I'm saying we need to stop it because it puts undue pressure on people when they're in this situation to say, oh my God, I'm not grieving correctly.
So what should people be saying to themselves?
There is no correct way.
Right. So what should people be saying to themselves?
Okay, so let me tell you.
Okay.
I'll tell you. So since let's recognize the fact that there are no research studies that support the 5 stages of grief.
Okay.
And that Kubler-Ross's model is very outdated. It's a model about dying. It's not a model about grieving. It's not a model about living. Pick up her book, read her book, and you will see. People typically like order and predictability in their lives. And this stages model offers that for people who are grieving. The care that we provide in healthcare is driven by research outcomes. All of our care, and patients say to me, well, what about this or what about that? I'll say, we do what's called evidence-based practice. What does the research document as effective? That's what we're going to do. Kubler-Ross is not evidence-based practice. The care model, in terms of research outcomes, and that with the Kubler-Ross model, there aren't findings to exist to support her model. Kubler-Ross was describing what she observed in people at the end of life, and even said herself that the 5 stages, and this is a quote from her second book, not stops on some linear timeline in grief. Not everyone goes through all of them or goes in any prescribed order.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't need to have, we don't need to hold on to that anymore. So how do we help people to grieve? The fact is that there's not a right way and there's not a wrong way to grieve. We each try to find ways to feel better in the face of loss. So if you're going to say, what is grief? How do you grieve? Grieve is time and work.
Time and work.
Time
all right. So
and work.
Work on what?
It's not this stage and then that stage and then that stage. It's time and work. It cannot be ignored because it'll come out in some other way. If you say, I'm not going to deal with my grief. I'm not going to talk about my grief. I am just going to put my nose to the grindstone and continue to work. Well, grief is one of those things that'll say, that's what you think.
Yeah.
And it'll
Yeah.
come out
Yeah.
in your health or in your relationships or in your mood. I was a master teacher scholar at a college I worked for in New Hampshire, and there was this other guy who was also a master teacher scholar, and his mother died. And every now and then I'd say, "How are you doing with that?" And he'd say, "I don't have time to think about that, Marianne. I don't have time to think about that." And I said, "You don't take some time to think about that, it'll come and bite you because it's not gone." And so we went to evaluate somebody who was teaching a class. That was part of what our job was. And the class happened to be about grief. And he sat in that class, and as he listened, he started crying. He had to leave because as he listened to the discussion about grief and loss, it just overpowered him and came out of him.
Yeah.
Now, when I say that grief and time is that grief is time plus work, we need to realize that time does not heal everything. It offers us the opportunity to try to make sense of the loss and become used to it. Time does not heal us. It gives us the opportunity to make sense of the loss and become used to it. And sometimes you say, I can't make sense of this. This is crazy. My child was walking home from getting a bag of candy and hit by a drunk driver. How do I make sense of that loss? Well, you try to make sense of the loss. You try to become used to it. It's going to be very, very hard and difficult. Is it time for you to get up?
Yeah, it's the seventh inning stretch. Sorry.
So the work aspect of it comes from working with a professional or peer support or some other sort of support group, or in your own way of finding a way to validate and recognize the loss. To be able to say out loud, here's what happened. And to be able to have a sense in your head, here's this story, here's this horrific thing. I put my 3-month-old down to sleep for a nap, and when I went into it to get her up, she seemed like she was sleeping a long time. I went in to get her up, she was dead. How do you validate and recognize that loss?
Yeah.
How does that make any sense in the world? But we know that there are things that can go wrong with babies in the very early months of their lives that can result in their death. And that it's horrific and it's horrible. And we need to learn that we're never going to lose that bond we had with that child, with that person, but our relationship is going to change. That little 3-month-old baby will always be our baby. It'll always be our baby. But that relationship changes in that she's not here for me to, hold and feed and nurture and start first grade and all the things that other parents, kids that your friends that you had, all of you, like especially as in some groups, like all of you got pregnant at the same time and you all had your babies at the same time, and then their kids are there and they're growing and you don't have yours. So your relationship with that child changes. These are incredibly horrific, hard things to go through. But clinging to the idea that I'm going to go through these 5 stages, and when I get to the end, I'm going to feel better. You're going to get to the end, and you're going to say, I still feel like crap. What the heck? How did this happen? So when you come and you listen to what we talk about here at Everyone Dies, it's because we're, again, we're evidence-based practice truth tellers. We want you to know that those 5 stages, cling to them as you will, is not going to fix your grief. We all personally experience grief and loss. You may be in a position where you're supporting people through grief and loss. Remember that each of you will have your own experience with grief. There is no silver bullet to lighten the grief experience. There is just nothing that's going to make it easier.
So what is a first step?
Support.
In something horrific like that. Yeah.
Support. In something horrific like it, you want to step. You want to play. You know what? The first thing is to kind of get through the social norms, okay? And in our society, in American society, and in many others, the social norm is to bury that body or create that, cremate, or in some way have a service of sorts, a funeral of sorts, to symbolically, show the end of that life. So that's the first thing. You get through that. And then you say to yourself, what do I need right now? Do I need to go to work and bury myself in there for a little while? And I'm going to give myself, you might say, I'm going to give myself 30 days to bury myself in work and not even think about it. And then I'm going to take a week and I'm going to do this. You might have to say, or you might say, I'm going to go lay in bed with a bag of Oreos and I'm not moving.
Okay,
or
so that's the thing first.
There's
what do I need for myself?
A bazillion things.
Yeah. No, but I mean,
What do you
just
need
as
for
a
yourself?
first step,
It's
what do I
time.
need for myself?
It's
Okay.
time and work. You can't ignore the grief. You have to, really what the task of grief is to find a new place for that person in your life. And we have the other podcasts that are up where we talk about that. Where is that person going to be in your life? The relationship is going to change because they're not there. Death ends a life, but it doesn't end the relationship. We talked with, that song, I Just Want You to Come Home, the one that we talked a few podcasts back. And his wife would say, people would say, oh, do you have any children? She would always say, yes, I have a son. He died at 16. He had this bone cancer. She never pretended otherwise. He was her son. He was there. He was real. And she would talk about him. But he had been dead 20 years. I don't know at what point he'd been dead where she was able to say to a stranger who said, oh, you got any kids? Yes, I have a son, and he died of this and he was 16. I don't know how many years it took her to be able to do that. But for her, he was her son, and she wasn't going to say, no, I don't have any kids. She was going to acknowledge him. That was his place in her life. And so it's that, we want a prescription. We want you want me to be able to say to you, here's what you do. Well, it's sort of like, here's what you do is you've got to lay in the grief a while. It's going to hurt. You're going to cry. You're going to say, you're going to feel like you don't want to go on in life. You're going to feel like you wish you were just with them in their casket. You're going to feel a million things that you never even would have thought that you would feel.
Okay.
And that's why it's hard to do that alone. It's hard to do that alone.
Well, with that, I mean, what you had said about you need to ask yourself, what do I need? And I think with that, just, from a layman's perspective is, just that. You like you said, you do need, regardless, I think someone does need to give him or herself time to grieve. But then beyond that, I mean, just to focus on that also, what do I need? And if I need to just lie in bed for a week with a, bag of Oreos every day, well, so be it. But I've also seen too, what you had mentioned before, society expects you, the burial, all that ritual. Yeah, I've just seen too many circumstances where, everyone knows, presumes what you need at the time of a death, rather than, maybe sometimes somebody does not want, a big funeral and a bunch of people clamoring around and having to deal with the wake afterwards and having a big, some people just don't want that. So again, to your point about, what do you need? I think it's okay to say, yeah, you know what? I don't want to wake. I don't want 100 people around. I just want to be left alone. And then what I've seen is sometimes people say, oh, no, I'll take care of it for you. That's okay. It's like, no, I don't want anyone around. No, it's okay. I'll take care. I think too, also sometimes when you make your feelings known, not everyone respects that. And they think they know better. And
well, they think that they know better. And so, and we need to do a show about how to handle,
yes,
people like that. And also like, even for the people like that who are like, they think that they're helping, they think they're saying the right things, and they're
they're
putting
not.
a knife in your heart.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah.
That's not what they're trying to do, but that's what they're doing.
Yes.
And so to be able to say to them, hey, you know what? Especially if it's two parents and one really wants the 100 people flocking about, and the other says, I don't want any of it. The person who doesn't want any of it has to be able to say to the person who wants it, you know what? Go ahead and do that. If that's what you need, please go ahead and do that. No insult to you or to our child or to anything, but I will not be there.
Yep.
And just to have it to be clear, it's not about, it's about I don't have what it takes, and I don't mean I don't have what it takes, but I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the whatever or even the need to be there to do that.
Yeah.
But if you need to be there to do that, then please do it. So we need to, as we're trying to help people, is to be supportive, to be kind, to recognize the loss, to acknowledge for people that they're riding their own roller coaster. Once that loss happens, you get on that roller coaster, and you don't never asked to be on the roller coaster. You don't like roller coasters, but here you are sitting in the car. And over time, you're going to go through those very, high, you're going to be up and riding down those roller coasters and screaming and crying. And at some point along the way, the highs will become lower, and the lows will become higher. It'll never be a flat ride. You're going to go up and down, but it's not going to be as dramatic as in the very, very beginning. And that's the time part. Is that the buttons will be pushed fewer and fewer times, but the buttons are still going to be pushed. You're going to say, at some point after 40, 50 years, geez, I'm still getting these waves. Yep.
Absolutely.
You know what? You
Yes.
can get them forever.
Yeah.
And I think that's another problem with the Kubler-Ross model, is it's saying, or how we've adapted the Kubler. I don't want to blame Kubler-Ross in her model. It's been adapted to be used in a way she never intended. So Elizabeth, rest in peace. I'm sorry that it got, misused this way. But, there's this idea that we're going to get to the fifth stage and it's all over. How often does anybody say to you, honey, you're going to feel this forever? It's not going to be as dramatic, but you'll feel it forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's going to be things that push that button, and it's just the way it is. And I'm so sorry that it's the way it is, but it is. So, Charlie, do you have any other questions about this topic?
No other questions, but I would like to remind folks that, we have a lot of resources on our, on our website. And what Sandy's going to be putting up are, different podcasts that we've had about grief, the traumatic grief, death of a pet, children's grief. So several will be on our website. So please go there. Not only listen for yourself, but, share these. Remember, it is a World Wide Web. So if you have friends anywhere in the world, you can share this with them. In addition, we are pleased to present an interview with Dr. Ken Doka about the stages of grieving. Dr. Doka has keynoted conferences through North America as well as Europe, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. He participates in the annual Hospice Foundation of America teleconference, as it appeared on CNN and Nightline. In addition, he has served as a consultant to medical, nursing, funeral service, and hospice organizations, as well as businesses and educational and social service agencies.
So we're talking with Ken Doka, and I have, the thing about Kubler-Ross and people talking and asking about, well, what stage am I in? How long am I going to be in that stage? How does that work? And, if you listen to our grief podcast, the way that I put it to you is that, Kubler-Ross is kind of an old-fashioned framework. And so since I had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Doka, the first thing I said was, Dr. Doka, tell me what you think about this. And so here he is.
Well, I think we have to recognize that Kubler-Ross made two very significant contributions to the field. And the first is that she taught us to listen to dying patients and to talk to dying patients and not to be afraid to talk about the dying process with them. And you have to go back to the 60s. When she was doing her work and wrote her book, and it was often a time when as one person put it, nobody died. And what we meant by that was not that nobody died, but people would say somebody would be 80 pounds and lying in a bed and could barely lift their arm, and they'd say, doctor, what's going to happen? The person would say, oh, I think in 4 months you'll be playing tennis, something, when everybody knew that was not the case. And we often had this mutual pretense that everyone knew what was happening, but nobody was talking about it. So I think Kubler-Ross was very important in helping us challenge that. She wasn't the first book on dying and death, but she was probably one of the early books that reached the bestseller list and that people got on. And I think her work had tremendous heuristic and historical value, that we look back on it. Remember, the book was published over 52 years ago.
Has it been that long?
What, 1969?
Jeez,
so clearly it's no longer current. I always tell my students, you'd be very, very hesitant to go to an oncologist who last read an article or a book about treating cancer that was written in 1969. Certainly you wouldn't want to have a doctor who hasn't kept up for the last 51 years. So we have to make the same statements about Kubler-Ross that are kind of difficult. That it is a different situation. It is a different circumstance now than it had been. And things have changed. People takes longer for people to die. People die less in hospitals. When I was 4 years old, I broke my arm. I spent months in a hospital. Now, if
really?
Yeah, because I needed 4 operations. So I was in there for not months, but probably a good 3 or 4 weeks. Where now, if I spent 3 nights, it'd probably be a lot.
Yeah.
So the treatment of people was different. We're talking, remember, I'm 73, so we're talking 69 years ago. We also have to remember that Kubler-Ross wrote about coping with dying, and I still think it's a simplistic model for that. But again, it was even later applied to grief. So we have to say the book had some importance. But and certainly, I used to require my students to read it just because of its historical reasons. But we no longer really think that people either die or grieve in some kind of stage-like process. We know we have multiple reactions, not just feelings, but physical reactions when we grieve, behavioral reactions, cognitive, spiritual. Probably the best advice that I would give to my students is that people die and grieve as they live. And and look, I had a professor once who said, look at the way you handle crises, and that's how you'll handle crises, barring some sudden insights or late life therapy. That'll be the way you will deal with crises at the end of life. If you're very stoic, I'd expect stoicism. I deal with things like often by writing. My colleagues often joke that I don't have many unpublished thoughts. But the reason for that is it's a way for me to work out issues, that bother me. I write about them, and that helps me understand them. So I would expect that hopefully not for a few years, maybe a decade or two, you might see articles by me saying a thanatologist copes with his own diagnosis, or but we all die and grieve as we live, and again, stage models are just too simplistic, really. And again, it's also important to remember that Kubler-Ross's model of the dying process was impressionistic. It wasn't based on data. And even she hesitated later on by saying, well, it's not really meant to be linear, and it's not really meant to be this, although it sounds like it. It certainly does when you talk about stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, all those stages. So again, it's an important theory to understand for historical reasons, but it's no longer one of the current models that we have in either the understanding of dying or the understanding of grief.
So are there the current ones? Are there any of them that are linear?
No. Most of them, for instance, one of the common models of the dying process, of the grieving process, is by William Worden. And Worden talks about what he calls tasks. That he says that there are certain kinds of issues that grieving people have to struggle with, and they don't struggle with them in any particular order, and they struggle with them in their own unique way. But for instance, adjusting to a life without the person, dealing with your emotions about the person, reconstructing beliefs, that have been challenged by the loss, maintaining, figuring out how to maintain. One of the new theories of understandings of grief is that we never lose a bond with the person who died. They're always part of our memory and part of our biography, and and we may have spiritual connections with them, whatever our spirituality is. So Worden's task model is one model in the grieving process, and then another very common model is the model by two researchers in the Netherlands, Hank Strobe and Hank Schutt and Maggie Strobe. I got that mixed up for a minute. And they talk about, in similar terms, that in grieving we oscillate, or we move between what they call the dual process theory. We move between adjusting to a life without the person and then having to deal with a loss. So, just to give you an example of that, I had a woman client who came into me one day, very, very proud that she had balanced the checkbook for the first time since her husband's death. That had been his traditional task. Mm-hmm. But then when she came back the next week, she said, when I left your office, I realized if John were still alive, I wouldn't have had to worry about that. So it's that oscillating, that moving back and forth among these two processes living a life in the face of the loss and dealing with the loss itself. That that are more current understandings of the grieving process.
And I think it's good for our listeners to know that it's such a very fluid, in the very beginning it can be from one minute to the other, going back and forth between these emotions, and that there's other things that can trigger or set off the loss or make you more aware of this person isn't in your life or what that relationship was. And what I hear patients say and people, other people say is that I want to stop feeling like this.
Yeah, and the answer for most people is over time you will, but there will always be surges of grief that we have even later in life. It may be the 10-year-old girl who 20 years later is getting married and walking down the aisle, and she misses the fact that her father is not there with her, or 30 years down the line when her child graduates from high school or something like that. That grandpa couldn't see this, or grandma couldn't see that, or my spouse didn't live to see this, and that's a very normal part of grieving too, and that's part of that continuing bond.
And I think that's hard for people. They want to be able to say, she's dead, I've buried her, I've grieved her, and now I'm going on with my life. And so when that grief comes back, it's sort of like, what the heck is this?
Yeah, but what I always do is when I counsel people, I talk about, and we talk about when these surges might occur. And it's interesting because one of the things that I also do at the very beginning when somebody comes into therapy is I ask them what they're expecting, and many times they say something just like you said. I guess I want to move on. I guess I want to detach. I guess I'm supposed to get closure. I always tell my students, bring closure to the word closure. Not a word we should use in the field. And I always say, is that what you really want? I challenge that. And they say, well, I never want to forget him. I never want to stop thinking about her. And then you say, and I usually tell people the first sign that they're doing better in grief is that they're able to laugh about a story that was once much too painful to recall. It's not about giving up memories. It's not about giving up connections. It's that those bonds are going to continue, but finding ways to continue those bonds without your presence, without the physical presence of the person. And one of the things that's that's important about that is to recognize that sometimes there may be moments where those bonds hurt at times. But most people would rather have them than not have any at all. As I look at my aging family, my grandson now is going off to college next year. My granddaughter's in high school. It's that I don't want my family to forget me, and I certainly don't want my son to forget his grandfather and his grandmother, with whom he was very close to, and they have no intention of doing that.
Well, and I think that part of our job as the parents is to be inclusive in terms of talking about the people who died, to let the kids know we're these people are part of our life.
Yeah. What we do is the first three ornaments, we do a little, we have a big open house around Christmas, but before that we have a little family occasion where we decorate the Christmas tree prior to that. And the first three ornaments we put on are memorial ornaments to my parents, their grandparents, and then to my my godson's dad.
That's a nice tradition.
Yeah, it is.
And then do they talk about those people, or is it just...
we don't push a conversation, but sometimes they'll ask questions, and sometimes conversations will inevitably start. But, it's just a way of saying, yeah, they're part of our holiday, and we can talk about them if we wish to.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, have we put Kubler-Ross to bed or not?
I hope so.
Well, thank you, Dr. Doka, for taking some of your precious time to talk with me and to share your wisdom with our listeners.
I so much enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And with that, thank you for listening. Please stay tuned for future episodes of Everyone Dies. This is Charlie Navarrete reminding you of the wise words of George Carlin. I'm always relieved when someone is delivering a eulogy and I realize I'm listening to it.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we look forward to talking with you soon. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.